Starter.
We have felony warrants. Men like me will return fire with superior fire.
Wow.
Darren Carter, you think men like these are afraid of an uneducated, 125-pound punk like you that's never won a fair fight in your life and holds your gun sideways? Young man, I'll meet you on solid ground anytime, anywhere, light or heavy. Makes no difference to me. You won't walk away.
This is on the news.
Men like us,
Wow.
son, we do dumbbell presses with weights bigger than you. And the convicts in jail, most of those men are good people who just found themselves crossed with the law. They're not evil, and they don't respect you or any punk like you. They'll toss you around like a rag doll. I encourage every citizen watching
That's pretty
this
good, right?
to look into
This
your
is on
eyes
the
This is on the
and find
news.
the American courage that conquers all evil. I implore you to listen to this message and stand up. Take back your streets. Take back your country. Come forward with information about these heathens that have terrorized your community.
One take.
And for those who would use this message as a way to create false racial division in our country, take a close look behind me. Standing next to every cop is a leader of our black community. This is not about race. It's about right versus wrong.
Yo, what's happening, people? I love me some Clay Higgins, and that was, I think, Joe Rogan's first time seeing him. He didn't even know he was a sitting member of the House at the time, but there's actually a reason why I'm using his clip there, even though that has nothing to do exactly with the, well, kind of does actually a little bit, but we'll get into that as we get into the subject, but I had no idea he was such a hardcore cop he talks about how he was a beat cop and, before he was in Congress, but I didn't know he was on different television channels basically challenging gang members to shootouts in the middle of the street. So yeah, it's pretty hardcore, I'd say. But no, it's kind of it's subject, and it's been kind of covered more or less by several places already, and it's sort of made the rounds, but I'm just kind of tying it all together nicely into a bow. And there's one other reason that I'm spotlighting it, because there was a bill that was just introduced, I think it was either yesterday or the day before, that was attempting to sort of make sure that this problem wasn't going to come up again. And of course, like I've got some sad proof of exactly why things never really passed through Congress, as well as unfortunately the absolute ignorance and lack of any kind of knowledge of history by your elected representatives. So just prepare for that. Anyway, so what am I talking about? Well, if you don't live in the United States, or if you do and you don't watch any kind of up-to-date information, you may have not known there were two hurricanes on the East Coast that kind of struck back to back. One was moving right up from the Gulf to Florida, and then the other one kind of came more from further west, like towards from South America and the Panama Canal area to kind of crossed up through parts of the Gulf into, I think it actually went through Cuba, or was it another one? I can't remember which island. I think it was Cuba, but anyway, and then that struck as well, and they were both real massive hurricanes. And so first we were like, everybody was wondering, where's FEMA? FEMA's like, they're usually, because FEMA, if you once again, if you're not a citizen of the United States, you may not know, FEMA is our sort of disaster relief crew from the government that comes out and tries to rescue people that are stranded, or tries to provide food, water, shelter to people who need temporary housing or temporary shelter, or things like, because especially in hurricanes like this was an unusual one because of the nature. Like most hurricanes that come through United States areas, that like aside from like just tornadoes and just general like disasters that happen on land where there's no that it's not directly related from like an area like the coast, or a storm specifically that's going to flood. Most of these types of things usually happen closer to the shoreline, so it's not like it's better, but it does make it easier for the water to recede once the storm is over, and then there's no real need to really figure out some sort of artificial way to push the water back, because it just naturally recedes back into the ocean. But in this case, it went so far inward towards the center of the, like past the shore, past the shoreline area and the mountainous areas around the coast, inward, and ended up kind of landing in a lot of mountainous regions and hilly regions where there's a lot of peaks and valleys, and then there's big bodies of water trapped in these areas that are like just completely overflowing with water, and then it's just impossible to have that. In fact, I think a few, like one or two levees may have broken that were actually, that obviously makes it even worse, and so a lot of people, especially because not only do you have that as an issue, but you also have the sort of just general problem that people that usually live in more mountainous regions of the country are more just generally isolated because of the terrain, and they're not heavily populated areas where people are easy to find. The houses are spread out a lot more widely, and even though it's an area where generally it's a lot more of a smaller, tight-knit community where everybody knows everybody, there wasn't much you could do when there's such a large, relatively speaking, large spans of area that is going to have to be searched, and people weren't sure who was, if their friends or their family, who was alive and who was dead, and people lost homes and businesses and all kinds of like life savings and things like that. It was just a complete disaster, and so once again, FEMA's usually there within a day or two to begin rescue operations and to begin to help provide relief to the people that are that they pull out. And this time it took them like 5 days to even get to the area, which was bad enough. But then this was still during the presidential, this was right just before the election. So it was, but it wasn't really heavily discussed as much in the discussion, which is why I'm kind of going over it too, because it was a topic you would imagine would have come up. But I think at the time, a lot of things were still unclear, and no one knew exactly what happened, because there was discussion about certain things being true, and nobody knew for sure, so they didn't want to falsely report on it. And if you were a candidate, you definitely didn't want to say something was true before you knew the truth about it. But there was some really dumb things that were brought up, like it's reminiscent of when Hawaii had the fires that came up. Like, I think that was last year, and the Biden administration announced something like they're going to provide every citizen of the island that caught fire, they were going to provide them with a check for like $700 or something. It's like, okay, well, that'll get us not quite a week, but okay, that's nice, and it's not like people would normally complain, except that we all know what's happening at the border, and kind of treatment that illegals are getting, and the fact that, even we've talked about this on the channel before. They're put up in hotel rooms where American citizens are still homeless and sleeping on park benches or sleeping out on the streets. Some of the immigrants are sleeping on the streets, but most of them are, pretty well provided for, and they end up taking up anywhere that will make space for them, including places like airports or community centers, and even a school was used at one point to house illegal immigrants. It was so obviously ridiculous. But then we're starting to hear more and more about how FEMA's emergency relief funding had been drained significantly because it was helping to provide financial resources as necessary for housing the illegal immigrants, and also to provide them with food and to just basic living expenses, aside from what the government was already giving them, free phones and all this other shit. And so it was bad enough with Hawaii. Now it's happening to places in the continental U.S. where there's two massive storms, and they're really unique in terms of both them happening back to back, like very, very close to one another, and at the same time also being in areas that don't normally get. They're unique to this type of storm. So the entire rescue operation was extremely difficult, and it was taking a long time to get everything cleaned up. But if that wasn't bad enough, recently there was even more information that came out, which was mostly provided originally by some whistleblowers that I believe were either in FEMA or affiliated with FEMA in some way, that there was some sort of policy that was being given to FEMA's relief workers that was explaining to them the guidelines for their day-to-day operations. And I'll show you a clip with Jim Jordan in just a second in the House Oversight Committee, and he's going over the message. It's giving some very basic instructions: stay in a group and maybe make sure you stay hydrated, and then it comes up to one: avoid homes with signs that support former President Trump for president. And whoa, what? So, yeah, this has obviously raised a lot of eyebrows and a lot of questions. And aside from the fact that would be really startling if it were on its own, this is just continuing a pattern of once again, another government agency or bureaucracy or some sort of group that is government employees being instructed to treat Americans differently based on their political affiliation. This is totally and completely unconstitutional. There's no reason that you would have to be able to legally discriminate based on someone's political views, especially when it comes to something that is a life or death situation. And if someone's desperately in need of water or food or electricity or of shelter or something, and you pass over their house because they have a Trump support sign in their yard, that's not only completely against the law, that's really goddamn sick. And so obviously that's caused quite a bit of a stir among people that have heard about it. But as we're going to go over today, and I only have a couple of things to show today, I'm not going to take a ton of time because I just did that episode last night, but I did want to cover this because this just came up today and I watched it. I did get a little miffed, and I'm probably going to get a little miffed again when I watch it. But I think it's important because number one, like I said, these are people that are elected to the House of Representatives. They're supposed to be representing the constituents that voted for them, and ultimately their job is to pass legislation. They are lawmakers first and foremost. So when they are honestly just openly kind of stating that, well, in these circumstances, who cares if the law is followed? Not to mention the fact that they are completely ignorant to what they're talking about. I have to say that, if there's any reason why people should have a distrust or a negative view of Congress, it's because of people like this. It's not the whole of Congress. It is it's not a handful. It's a group of ideologically driven extremist basically people who have a serious chip on their shoulder and use that as an excuse for any kind of rhetoric or behavior by saying that, well, you've done worse to me. And that's been the kind of back and forth tug of war, pull and push and pull and push and pull that I've been watching for so long. And so when I hear people complain about why isn't Congress ever doing more, I played that one clip earlier on in the earlier episode. I can't remember what it was, or what episode it was, but there's a video in the Senate side where they were holding that confirmation hearing for judges that they were trying to approve, and the chairman of the committee, Dick Durbin, who is always just a real treat to watch because he's such an honorable senator, by ignoring one half of the people in the room. But you can see by this picture why there is this problem with our legislative branch of government because of this divide where one side seems willing to work with the other side seems like they want to, and there are people who are better at this than other people, but quite frankly, at this point, it's becoming hard to see how it's going to be possible because there are people that are big enough to be able to brush that off and be big enough to continue working towards the overall goal. But I gotta admit, there's other people, and I don't blame them, that hear rhetoric that comes out that is so inflammatory and so bigoted and so absolutely prejudiced on one side. It's like learning nothing from any of the stuff that is supposedly the goal of people that are supporting they're so dedicated to the DEI agenda, diversity and equity and inclusion, and I swear I hope that one thing that happens during this administration with Trump is that agenda gets buried so deep underground that no one ever even realizes where it is or where to dig and has no idea where to find it ever again, because that has been one of the most dangerous sorts of policies. That's the kind of thing that's had these suggestions rise where we need to have racial quotas for things like pilots and doctors and things like that, because God knows that there's not enough danger you're going to be facing if you're in a high-risk job like that, to where you don't really want the best of the best. No, what you really want is someone diverse. What you really want is a Hispanic guy, or a black guy, or an Asian woman, or it doesn't really matter, if they're as skilled as the white male guy. That's not important. What's important is the diversity. I'm sorry, what are you? And they're serious about this. They're actually, honestly, not even joking when they discuss this, because it literally was the sort of admitted policy of several airliners that were, and you got to wonder sometimes. It's hard to tell. Is it the companies that are doing it of their own accord, or is it the government forcing it down on them? And it seems like it's kind of a combination of both, though, because similarly with the when we were in the pandemic, and there was the mandate for the COVID-19 vaccine. The vaccine mandate was being pushed, and if you were in a company that had more than 100 employees and you weren't vaccinated, you were facing termination, and they were expecting that the employers would fire anybody who wasn't vaccinated. And it was like the kind of situation where, once again, this might be, something that we are forcing onto people, but I mean, they have. This is what really matters. It's like the idea of ends justifying the means over and over again, and them showing this tendency to just not have any interest in even pretending like there's any respect for people's right for their own decisions that they make about their own health care, their own level of, whether it be religious or not, because I know plenty of people that aren't religious that were not getting the vaccine for a myriad of reasons. And one of them for me was that after I got COVID, I didn't feel like there was any real need to get the vaccine, because I figured, I have probably pretty strong natural immunity. I got it not during the first major wave of COVID, but I think it was at the tail end of the second one. And as I've said before on the show, I was like, when I got it and I was dealing with it, I was like, wow, this is it. This is the big, scary, terrible condition that people have that is making people go so insane that they're locking themselves inside for, months and not going anywhere, and wearing masks that, even Dr. Fauci at one point admitted didn't do anything, until he insisted all of a sudden, no, they do. And it's just, it's more of this control for control's sake, I guess, is the only other way you can put it. But anyway, so that's what we're going to kind of go over today. I'm going to start one clip first with Jim Jordan talking to the director of FEMA. And this is actually going over the written policy that I was just talking about. So, excuse me, let me pull this up real quick, and then we'll just kind of stare in awe probably at how batshit crazy this is after we're done. Is it this one, or is it? Wait, did I get this one twice? I think I maybe did. Here, let me check real quick. Oh, no. Okay. It's got to be this one. No, it's not that. Oh, I know what happened. Oh, no, here it is. Okay. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Okay. All right, let me pull this up. All right, so I can't remember. Let me see real quick. I'll be able to see if I... Yeah, so this was 2 days ago, the 19th. So this was just... because these things have been coming in slowly, but whenever an event like this happens, they want to question the directors of the agencies, so that, particularly in the oversight committee, so that they can get the full scope and scale of what's been going on, and also so that they can potentially do something about it. But as we've seen before with certain government agencies and their administrators, when acting as a witness in front of Congress, they aren't always so forthcoming with information, and they always seem to have this sudden, remarkably strong case of amnesia that just springs up out of nowhere, where suddenly they don't remember so many key details that they should, be well aware of when they come to Congress to testify on the subject, but for some reason they just can't remember. So, never mind. So anyway, let's get to this, and we'll pop out on the other side. Oh, there's no volume. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Now let's do this.
Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Criswell, is Miss Washington lying to us?
Miss Washington has...
She said it's common practice. You said it's reprehensible and isolated. Both statements can't be true. So someone's not giving us the facts. And I'm kind of trying to figure out who's not telling the truth.
The actions that Miss Washington took were unacceptable.
Well, you had another employee. Now, they remain anonymous, but I think one of my colleagues pointed this out earlier. A FEMA official who spoke on condition of anonymity said Miss Washington likely received, quote, very clear guidance from her supervisors. Is that not that person lying too?
I have not received any evidence outside of the screenshot that Miss Washington directed.
So those
her
two
team.
people are wrong. They're not telling the truth to us.
We are currently investigating this
But that's
issue
not what
and
you said.
bringing
You
in
said
the
this is
IG.
isolated, reprehensible, hasn't happened. This is the only time. And they're saying, nope, 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 it's commonplace.
I am saying that FEMA's mission is to help all people.
Well, let's look at
before,
maybe
during,
the
and
best
after
evidence we
disaster.
have is the actual screenshot. Can you put the screenshot up on the screen? Let's look at what the text message said. The text message said, implement best practices. Like, this is the best practices. We're going to implement them. And they talk about
What I was talking about, this list.
making sure you're going in pairs or with more than one person, avoid the Trump homes, drink your water, take your towel, coconut waters. So stay hydrated, walk with someone else, and don't go to the Trump homes. It seems pretty common and matter of fact in the actual evidence we do have, the text message itself. But you're still saying Miss Washington and this other person aren't telling the truth.
When I received this text message, it was not in accordance with the way we conduct business at FEMA, and I directed
Even though it said best
termination.
practices, even though it said stay hydrated, which everyone would agree with, even though it said go in pairs, which everyone would agree with, even though it said bring a towel, make sure you're covered up, even it said coconut water is the best way to stay even though it said all those practical things, the part about avoiding the Trump homes, that's not a best practice, that's not commonplace. Is that what you're saying?
That is nowhere in our policy, and I can't speak to
I'm
the
not saying it's in your
motivations
policy.
behind what Miss Washington did.
But it was, okay, now and her supervisor, this Mr. Hershey, have you talked to him and to find out if he knew this was happening?
I understand that he was in her chain of command, and this is under investigation.
Have you talked to, there's 13 people on this text message, have you talked to all 13 of those individuals?
This incident is under investigation.
That's not what I asked you. I
Office-
know it's under investigation. We know how investigations work when it's done inside the agency. It takes forever.
we
I'm
do
asking,
know.
did you talk to the 13 people on this best practices text message?
The Office of Professional Responsibility has taken this, and they are following appropriate protocol to investigate.
Is the Inspector General looking at it as well?
And I have asked the Inspector General to take a look at this. I
Any
welcome
idea when,
their
any idea
review.
when they're going to talk to these 13 people since you have it? Have you talked to, how about you personally? Have you talked to any of these 13 people?
I have not talked to them.
You have not talked to
personally.
any
I
of them?
have an entire team that focuses on this investigation, and that's what they're doing.
Seems to me it's part of a mindset that's in government. And this is the scary part, because I think it's broader. And you don't have to take my word, take it what people have said. I mean, this reminds me, we've talked about this many times, but I can think of, well, actually the same person, let's go back to that, the same person who said, that this likely received very clear guidance. This other FEMA official also said this: I've heard from other entities who were serving in North Carolina that there was clear guidance to be mindful, quote, of the types of people who are in Western North Carolina. That's pretty derogatory stuff there, isn't it?
I have not seen any.
But you know what it sounds like? It sounds like Peter Strzok. Peter Strzok, when he said, oh, I just went into Walmart, I can smell the Trump supporters. Sounds like...
Peter Strzok, by the way, is, I mentioned him once before, I think. He was the FBI agent who was running Crossfire Hurricane, the collusion of the Trump campaign with Russia in 2016 to win the election with the help of Vladimir Putin to get Trump elected. That was that was Peter Strzok. That was that scumbag who said pretty much what he said there. He texted his the lawyer at the FBI that he was cheating on his wife with, and telling her that he just walked into a Walmart. He can smell the Trump supporters. So yeah, that gives you a great idea of his character. The guy just had the kind of face that you just want to punch. It's just so smug. Oh God, the guy's a complete arrogant asshole. Which, by the way, he earned himself a fancy little gig on I think MSNBC, or I think it's MSNBC. Being of course, with that kind of impressive resume of absolutely unquestionably biased investigation, he's the kind of expert we definitely want to hear from when it comes to FBI policy and things like that. Like, he'd be number one on my list of people that I'd want to talk to. Because what a credible guy. Jeez. Anyway, that's just to put it in context. That's what we're talking about, and it rings true. So.
Joe Biden, when he said, oh, the garbage I see is the Trump supporters out there. Sounds like the guys the Democrats had, professor the Democrats had testify back in 2019 in the impeachment. Conservatives, especially very conservative people, tend to spread out, perhaps because they don't even want to be around themselves. This disdain, this mindset that's in the government where everyone's deplorable, everyone's garbage, everyone is, smelly people at Walmart, and be mindful of those people in Western North Carolina. That's what it sounds like. And again, the best evidence is the text message we have, which reinforces that mindset that we have seen from so many people in our government.
The actions directed by Ms. Washington are unacceptable. And when I received this text message, I directed her termination.
Do you have any idea who this other official is?
I do not, and if you have that information, Congressman, please share it.
I don't have it. You're the one who's got it. You're the one who hasn't talked to the 13 people on the text message.
It has not been raised to me.
All right. I think, Chairman, I yield back.
So you can tell, she's saying all the things that she's supposed to say, but at this point, it's like it's so devoid of any kind of emotion that it's really just hollow, because it's the same kind of shtick that they gave about pro-life Catholics, and the same shtick they gave about parents that went to school board meetings about transgender ideology and being pushed in classrooms, and the sorts of books that they were allowing children to look at, which, once again, it wouldn't be such a big deal if they weren't literally describing. Well, you know what? I've been looking for an excuse to play this for a while. How about I give you guys a little sample? Because why not? It's just audio, but I've been looking for an excuse to play this for a while, and because I clipped this thing and I used part of it for the soundboard. I didn't actually use it for the soundboard, but I did get part of it clipped because I think this one was too long. But this is an excerpt from one of the books that was being contested by parents that they didn't want their children having access to in school libraries, which, by the way, as the left tries to label this book banning, there's one little problem with that. No one is suggesting the book be banned. You can still buy the book. The book's available for purchase on places like Amazon, probably Barnes & Noble, probably anywhere you can find books. It's probably going to be there. The question is it appropriate to have this book in a school with children who are, in some cases, we're talking about elementary school, so under the age of 13. Is that a appropriate place? And it just seems kind of ridiculous. I mean, you don't argue that not having Hustler in elementary school is magazine and book banning and censorship. No, because that's a ridiculous argument. But for some reason they were pushing this one. Like, I guess it was because the only card they had to play was that. Because they have to stick that Nazi theme, with whatever they are bringing up, and so in that spirit, let's call it book banning. Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're book ban. It's similar to the whole "Don't Say Gay" bill that they were categorizing. Ron DeSantis passing in Florida, which literally did not have the word "gay" or "don't say gay" or anything like that in the bill at all. It was about the appropriate age that you could begin talking about these sorts of topics with school children. Like, what age was the minimum appropriate age that Florida was going to allow in consultation with parents and with student advocacy groups, and then, of course, the teachers union was kicking and screaming the whole way because they give all their money to Democrats, and they pretty much bought them off at this point to do their bidding. So I don't know really what they get out of pushing the transgender stuff, other than maybe the nonprofits that promote that sort of thing, and maybe, I guess, protection from Antifa or whatever. But where in the hell is that? Is it here? Yeah, it's in here. Hold on. Oh, wait. Yeah, no, that was it. Let me see if I can... Because this is really actually a great example, and it's really disturbing, but, it's still pretty... Oh, you know what? I have the whole clip, not just the one excerpt. So I'm not going to play the whole clip. I'm just going to play the reading of the excerpt from the book, because the whole rest of the clip it's a pretty long clip. But anyway, so these are the sorts of books that the left was claiming just have to be available to children in schools. And this is the kind of material they're talking about. So let's bring this up.
I put some lube on and got him on his knees.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. That's not a great place to stop it, I know. But if I remember correctly, wait, hold on. Because I think that, well, here, let me do this real quick and not let you guys hear this or see this, and check real quick, because I think this is like an intro where they cut it off partway through and then they repeat it again. So let me just make sure that oh, okay, here we go. Okay, I was right. But I think he said the whole thing, but just for the sake of making sure that that we catch all of it and don't hear it repeated, we'll just go about it this way. So, okay, here we go. So this is the Senate hearing where you debate these sorts of issues, And of course, Senator Kennedy is the one who goes into this, and that makes it all the more entertaining, I guess we'll say. But here we go. Here's the argument. Oh, whoops! I'm sorry. I didn't turn the volume back on again. Okay, there we go.
I'm a little confused, and I appreciate the argument or discussion that we've been having, but for me, it's a little too conceptual, or I don't know, metaphysical or theological or whatever you want to call it. I want to try to understand what you're asking us to do. Let's take two books that have been much discussed. The first one is called All Boys Aren't Blue, and I will quote from it. I put some lube on and got him on his knees, and I began to slide into him from behind. I pulled out of him and kissed him while he masturbated. He asked me to turn over while he slipped a condom on himself. This was my ass, and I was struggling to imagine someone inside me. He got on top and slowly inserted himself into me. It was the worst pain I think I have ever felt in my life. Eventually, I felt a mix of pleasure with the pain. Close quote. All boys aren't blue. The second is another much discussed book. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's called Genderqueer.
This is the one I clipped, by the way.
Let me read an excerpt from that. Quote, I got a new strap-on harness today. I can't wait to put it on you. It will fit my favorite dildo perfectly. You're going to look so hot. I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth. I'm going to give you the blowjob of your life. Then I want you inside of me. End quote. Now.
So, you expect that, if someone was going to pick a hill to die on, that arguing that kind of literature being advocated that to be available for children 12 and under would not be exactly the hill you would really be willing to lay it all on the line for. And yet there they are, and they tried desperately to frame this about how the irrational parents are being so unreasonable in what books they don't want to be available to children, and if there's a student who happens to be feeling transgender, and I don't give a shit. When I was that age, I think I would have been confused at basically the whole thing. Like, unless someone went out of their way to explain it to me, which I'm sure they do now at this point, I wouldn't want to know. But as we discussed yesterday with Democrats, and they're sort of burying their head in the sand willfully to avoid hearing this kind of thing. There's obviously, a number of people who are very, very, I don't want to say excited, but I guess enthusiastic about the concept of young children being taught this type of lesson, or I don't know worldview. I don't know what you call it. This type of bullshit. I guess I'll just call it that. Oh my God. Anyway, I just, one day when the soundboard is up and running, because I think, let me see something real quick. I'm just going to test this real quick. Let's just see. I think maybe.
You are fake news.
Hey, it does work. I gotta start using my. It looks like it's working fine now. So yeah, I think you'll be able to. I'll have to start pulling this out more often when we hear things like, Oh, looks like that one doesn't work yet. Okay, hold on. Oh, this is a bad one.
We already have a nigger mayor. We don't need any more nigger big shots.
That's Joe Biden, by the way. Anyway, so I didn't even know it, but man, this thing's working great. So we're gonna have to find some good times to use these, because man, I could have fun with this all day.
Black Lives Matter was founded by a bunch of fat, black, radical lesbians.
So anyway, I better stop before I have too much fun. So anyway, so to get back on subject with the floods in FEMA. The reason I even brought all that up was just because it takes something like that to really, that put the witnesses on their heels. Like that one senator's line of questioning, by just laying out the facts as they were, was enough to do that. And you can kind of see, as Jim Jordan in that clip is just kind of rapid firing questions that should be very easy to answer if you actually really were interested in solving the problem. It's interesting because in this instance, and I think the reason is because this was obviously an employee at FEMA, or someone who was working at FEMA in some capacity, who was not so high on the totem pole. So there's always this question of, when is somebody going to get fired for their incompetency? And I think she probably was going in there imagining that, saying, well, we fired this person who was causing this problem, and was expecting that, oh, okay, well, great, I guess the problem would probably be solved. But then, more people started mentioning it. No, this is actually a widespread problem. It's not just this one employee. And so that probably threw her off guard and gave her a sort of different outlook on the rest of the hearing for the day, because now some people weren't all that intense with their lines of questioning, but there were some that were just as fierce. And the problem that is consistently shown is that and this just brings up a point, because this is something that gets used a lot, this sort of tactic to sort of play a reverse role sort of scenario, but it gets used all the time because it's really effective. So just for a second, imagine that instead of FEMA operating with the guidelines stating that avoid homes with Trump signs, it was, imagine them saying avoid homes with Kamala Harris for president signs. Can you imagine how crazy the left would go because of that? You know how loud they would be shouting? They would never shut up about it, and every single media outlet on television would shut up about how FEMA was discriminating against Democrats because of their obvious racial bias or whatever the hell they would say it being about. And of course, they turn it into DEI, but they turn everything into DEI and always about racial. Because the thing that drives me nuts is when they use like climate change, for example. Not only is climate change this horrible existential threat, but apparently it also is threatening minorities and people of color even more than anybody else. Like, they're particularly at risk. When you ask them, well, why is that? Well, they kind of don't really have an answer. They just kind of use confusing circular reasoning to state that it's an overly burdensome issue, particularly for people of color, because of reasons. I don't really understand why, because, there's no real argument. It's just that, I guess, just like getting a driver's license, everything is just such a struggle for black people, which is such an insult to anyone, black, Hispanic, Asian, anybody in the country that happens to be a different racial background or even mixed race in some way, that they are somehow less capable of just about everything, according to Democrats now, not according to conservatives, of course. They don't seem to think that black people can't get IDs, and black people can't use a computer, and black people can't pass college without their help, and that mindset is just not present on the conservative side. But I have to play this clip because, and we'll probably end on this because I'm probably going to get too angry after I start watching this. But it's important because this was the bill that was being introduced to try and sort of deal with this problem and make sure that there was actually legislation passed to make it so that FEMA and other government agencies could not use DEI or some sort of other excuse for otherwise necessary aid going to someone in time of a disaster based on any characteristic other than their level of danger or the threat that's posed by the current disaster and the situation that's immediately in their area. So, but even that's too controversial for these assholes. So, and the reasons why are pretty astounding, and that's why I'm really probably going to get as angry as I did. But I also want to do it because I want to, anybody out there that watches this, I want to make sure that, we set the record straight here, because I'm sure a lot of you that are going to be watching this or are watching this know that a lot of this is just BS. And even the parts that aren't BS, they're misrepresented. But there's some really egregious statements made here. And you look back and see in times when America has been under crisis, there was an effort for us to, and genuinely a good faith effort for people across the aisle to work together to help Americans that are suffering. There's so much indifference now to the suffering of, I'll just say this, in particular, any white American, because it can be just, there can be an excuse for it. And there's no excuse for it. Just the same way there's no excuse for it for anyone of any race or any religion or demographic, period. It's so sick, and yet it is being pushed, and they use a term that is their way of distinguishing the two, which I'll just say it right now. Whenever they came up with this term, it was one of the most disgusting things they've ever done to push it. The idea of quote-unquote reverse racism. It's despicable and just like could only come from a sick mind that is just obsessed with racial differences, that you would see blatant racism, but because it's against a white person, that's not racism, that's quote-unquote reverse racism. That is such a stupid way to label it. When you believe that your race is better or more deserving or more exceptional in some way, or in any way there's an argument to be made for your race against another race, that is most definitely, at the bare minimum, an argument for discrimination, if not racism. But regardless of the reasoning why, it doesn't really matter. The fact that you can't look at suffering people and feel enough empathy to want to help them out from a place of a place where you actually have the power to do something about it, in the United States House of Representatives, and you're just like, fuck them, they deserve it. Like, what happened to these people? Honestly, I don't really care, but like, what's really more important is, do their representatives, do the people they're representing know that this is what they're doing, that this is what they're saying? And we know that that's definitely not the case for some, because when it comes to Jamal Bowman and who was it? Corey Bush. We know that they lost their seats in the House of Representatives because of the fact that they just kept pushing this same narrative, and they did it nonstop, and it was pretty awesome to see that. I don't care even if they voted for another Democrat, as long as it's a Democrat that's not get the same kind of obvious pent-up anger towards another race for just some reason that seems to be like, inherited rhetoric and inherited beliefs from someone who clearly has some very very strong racial bias against other groups of from different demographics, but it's translated here in a way that's so not only over the top, but is so removed from modern America that it makes you wonder, like, what is it that could be done that would make the situation better? And the only conclusion I can come to is there is nothing you can do to make it better. You could essentially adopt all their ridiculous, over-the-top policies. The country wouldn't last much longer, but you could try it for a few weeks to maybe a few months, and see what happens with the population, to where it would be an absolute fury back and forth, and that would be all by design. So let's listen to this abomination of test. But first, it's Clay Higgins once again. My man Clay Higgins, he's the one that is explaining the bill, I believe. And let's see. Oh, I think I put that in the other folder here. I'm getting better at organizing this stuff, guys. I'm getting better at it, and I think I know exactly where it is. I think it is in this folder right here. Yep, it is. Ha! See, told you. Okay, all right. Let me pull this up. By the way, I'll try to work on that soundboard a little more and start getting some more clips up, because I knew that the clips were uploaded. I didn't know that they would be playable just from the soundboard, just from my Stream Deck yet. So that's great news, as a matter of fact, because now I can really start throwing in some fun some fun little added bonuses to our daily streams. But anyway, let's pull this up and we'll go over this. Okay. All right. So I'm going to brace myself, and I suggest you do the same, but here we go.
Colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I'm an original co-sponsor of this bill, and I've noted some of the comments here, and I believe we should take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we seek in our republic regarding individual rights, liberties, and freedoms? I mean, do you believe in those core tenets of our republic or not?
They don't.
We have an opportunity before us with this bill to push back against it. The ranking member mentioned a sweeping attack. Yes, this is what we have suffered. We have suffered as a nation, a sweeping attack against equality. That's exactly what we're fighting against. Another colleague mentioned oppression and degradation. It's exactly what we're pushing back against. This is a bill that eliminates government-sponsored oppression of individual rights, liberties, and freedoms in the land of the free. Freedom of opportunity, not result.
But we are debating legislation that denies the sky is blue, water is wet, and racism is real. The major provision of the bill says to ban anything that acknowledges racism. And a few pages later in the exact same bill, there are multiple provisions discussing the presence of racism. This Republican approach is as predictable as it is nonsensical. On one hand, they're saying that racism does not exist. On the other hand, they are saying there is rampant reverse racism. Well, how do you reverse something that never existed in the first place? Riddle me that. While this Republican policy may have an...
So I gotta chime in. That's what I'm talking about. First of all, she's completely misrepresenting the argument. No one's denying the existence of racism. No one is denying that racism exists in the United States. No one's denying that. But as I've said before, and if anybody out there wants to, check this out, like I suggest definitely try it. Like, look up information with interviews with white supremacists and white separatists, and they are not the kind of people to shy away from telling you exactly how they feel about minorities. They are not the kind of people that will, in fact, you can't get them to shut up about it. I've said this before. They're not ashamed. They don't want to hide it. They're very proud of the fact that they once again, there's a reason why one of the slogans for white racists is white pride, because in their minds they feel they have been slighted against based on their identity. So they're going to be proud of it while openly being racist against another group. And sadly, that sounds a lot like what groups like BLM have suggested, or people like Ibram X. Kendi, who have suggested that the only solution for past racism is present day racism, is it racism, or is it inequality? It's one or the other. It's essentially saying that if a group of people based on immutable characteristics at any point in history was doing something unjust to another group of people based on their immutable characteristics, then the appropriate response is in the present to now do the same action to the people who were originally oppressing you or your demographic. Which, once again, none of these people in this room, none of these people alive today, and for the most part, no one that is alive, even has gone through serious segregation. There's very few people that were alive left during serious, real segregation in America, let alone slavery, or like Jim Crow laws. Like, there's very few people left that have experience actually living through those time periods and being harmed by them. There's still some, of course, but no one on. First of all, these are all very wealthy people who went to extremely expensive schools, and obviously didn't learn much, because you'll see in just a second. But now they're so outraged that someone would be making a appeal to come together and to force our government agencies to do the same, that she's just openly angry that someone would even suggest it, because it is somehow an insult to people that have been discriminated against, I guess, or something. I mean, I suppose that's the rationale, but once again, like, all you're doing is you're just prolonging the suffering. That's all you're doing. And her little reverse racism comment, once again, there's no such thing as reverse racism. There's racism. It doesn't matter who you're doing it to. And the bill also, like I said, what they're trying to do is to weed out policies that are causing division and oppression and discrimination based on race, gender, or other race, sex, religion, or any other characteristic that is immutable or deeply held religious belief or something. In our country, those are the things you cannot discriminate based on. But that's not. It's not denying racism exists. It's trying to do something about the obvious instance of government employing race-based tactics or discriminatory-based tactics to provide government services that are beneficial to people, to deny them to certain groups based on their political beliefs in this case. Now that this is totally missing the mark, and as I said, nobody disagrees that racism exists. The problem is that the amount of demand for racism in the media and in government is so woefully the supply is so understocked for the demand. There's not nearly enough actual racism and real discrimination that we see on a day-to-day basis, especially against black people. Because I mean, look at how cops have to act now. Cops in this country have become so fearful to get into altercations with anyone of a different race, especially if they're a white officer. Even if they're a black officer, though, they're scared to death. Why? Because they don't want to be the next Derek Chauvin. I mean, they don't want to be the next guy whose head is on the chopping block because of a cry out of police brutality. Because that's where and you could argue, oh, but that's just because they're doing something wrong. Well, in the case of Officer Derek Chauvin, I'm sorry, I'm going to maintain my stance that I've had for a long time, that like many others have, like Tucker Carlson has said, like I believe Tim Pool has mentioned before, George Floyd was displaying all the tendencies and behaviors and symptoms of someone going through an opioid overdose. And the toxicology reports show something, very similar to that by measuring the amount of fentanyl in his system and it being this ridiculously high amount that anyone would die from. But because the camera angle that was held up by a bystander was at an angle that made it look like the knee that he was using to restrain George Floyd was on his neck as opposed to where his knee was when you see their body cam footage, and it's actually on his upper spine and by his shoulders, his shoulder blades. Then you get a very different picture, and unfortunately, because of that, and despite the fact that that was in the protocol that they used in the police department in the area for decades, and there'd never been a fatality based on these techniques that were used frequently because of an individual that well, you get the idea. I'm sorry, I don't want to ramble on about it too much, but it blows my mind every time I hear it. And we're about to get into our really egregious stuff, so hold your hat. Here we go. Hold on to your hats. Here we go.
New name. It's the same old tired game. Look, y'all are entitled to your opinions, but not a denial of the facts. Do you all know your history? Do you know American history?
Oh, I do.
The
very well.
original Constitution counted enslaved individuals as 3/5 of a person. And I'd also just like to take a personal note of privilege to say, please keep Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s name out of your mouths. Yes. Your perversion of his words and his mission, when his children have asked you to stop invoking his name and perverting his work when he was a proud and unapologetic black man fighting for equality for black Americans and all marginalized people.
For all people.
So you all are entitled to your opinions, but not a denial of the facts. But I'm not surprised that you would deny American history. A colleague across the aisle invoked the phrase of, we must do everything to stop government-sponsored oppression. Well, I've just enumerated numerous examples.
They were all false.
Which is exactly why we have legislation and an executive order to reverse this harm. And that is why I'm committed to opposing this bill and urge my colleagues to do the same.
Okay. All right. So let me unload on this bitch because I'm tired of hearing shit like this. First of all, the 3/5 rule. Let's set the record straight. Why was the 3/5 rule invoked? Well, not like this dumbass would actually know, but this is why. Believe it or not, and regardless of what you may have heard, there was quite a bit of debate amongst the founding fathers about slavery. It wasn't just something that was accepted. A lot of people had strong disagreements with it, as a matter of fact. And this is what may also surprise you as well. They weren't all slave owners. As a matter of fact, I don't know. I think there was one that actually even owned a slave at all. And I can't remember who it was, but it wasn't even one of the ones we think of. It wasn't Washington, it wasn't Jefferson, it wasn't Madison. It was none of the people that come to mind when you think of the founding of America. It was none of them. There was a lot of dispute about whether or not it should be legal. Which, by the way, I'm not going to indulge in this whole clip because, quite frankly, I just realized, once again, I'm going to play the response from Clay Higgins, but it's going to be brought up later, something along the lines of we didn't want to be put on slave ships and pulled over here by you all. Well, that's another thing, because going back to how this all came about. White people were not going into Africa, white men, going into the jungles of Africa, finding tribes, going and conquering them and taking the men and women and taking them on the slave ships and bringing them back. The transatlantic slave trade was predominantly a trade route that was used by Arabs and Islamic people from the Middle East and from Northern Africa, and was mostly kept in check, mostly kept stocked in terms of new slaves by, actually, more than anything else, tribes that were at war with each other, and when one was successful in conquering another, they would enslave several people from the tribe that survived that they just conquered, and along come these slavers who are willing to spend insane amounts of money for them in terms of African money at the time. And so that is how they were purchased for the purposes of being sold all over the transatlantic routes. That didn't just include America. That included all over Europe and in some parts of South America and North America. So the idea that America is somehow unique in this, first of all, is a huge, complete misreading of history, or just a flat-out lie. Secondly, so besides the fact that, because if white men had gone into the interior of Africa, which I think even it may have been attempted at some point, they died of malaria. They didn't last very long. They didn't really frequent trips to Africa at that point in time. And not to mention the fact that they were dealing with all sorts of new diseases that came about as a result of being in the Americas, and not nearly as bad as Native Americans, which, by the way, were mostly wiped out in terms of their populations, not from colonial white men, but from diseases that they were unfamiliar with that had been brought back from Europe. So once again, there's not always some nefarious purpose that's always surrounding white people and wherever they go. There's sometimes a little bit more of a more mundane but still devastatingly sad and unfortunate consequence of the migration of people. And this isn't to excuse anybody that legitimately was, for genociding the Native American population. However, it is just to state that this wasn't a event that was entirely just based on a campaign of wiping out Native Americans tribe by tribe and village by village. There were massive outbreaks of all sorts of diseases that the Native American population had no experience with, no cures for, no resistance for, and they died from them. It's really sad and it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. Now, when it comes to the African Americans, let's go back to one of her main points. This 3/5 compromise. People talk about this all the time. 3/5 compromise. Let's clear the air up on what this was. Now, at the founding of the United States, it was originally decided, like it is today, that based on population for each state, there would be a number of votes in the Electoral College that would be assigned to them, as well as a number of representatives based on their population in the House of Representatives. And then as far as Senate, well, that was always two representatives from each state. Now, what does this have to do with the 3/5? Well, the pressure to maintain slavery as right under law was mostly coming from the southern states, which is why it eventually boiled over into the Civil War, obviously. And the 3/5 compromise originated based on the fact that the South was trying to push for their slave population to be counted amongst the population count in their states, so that they could use that number as an artificial way to inflate their actual population, so that they would have an outsized vote in terms of their weight in the Electoral College, as well as in the number of senators they would have in the House of Representatives. The North didn't like that idea, obviously, because there were way less slaves there, and because they didn't want them to have this giant extra population that couldn't vote, of course, because they were slaves, and really only were in service in that regard based on inflating the numbers. There was nothing about them that was being represented by congressional members until after the Civil War, and there was no way that they were going to gain any benefits from the Electoral College or anything else that was based on population. This was only to help the slave owners in the South to bolster their numbers. So, in order to come to some sort of conclusion, there were a bunch of numbers that were thrown out, but it was eventually decided upon that each slave would count as 3/5 of a vote, so that yes, there would be a count of people in those states that would be represented as larger populations, purely because of the idea that, well, that's true, but maybe there could be things that are passed that are meant to improve the conditions that these people may be living under. There may be things that will be passed that will be beneficial, even in a roundabout way, to the slaves that are with their owners in these areas. And then obviously eventually there may come a time when slavery is no longer permitted, and in that case then we'll have full American citizens that would be counted in the census. So it's not denying that black people are, it's not suggesting that black people are less than people. It was meant to be representative of the population for the purposes of governance, pure and simple. I mean, so these ideas that come to mind when they throw this stuff out to suggest that they were doing this to demonstrate that they were less than human, that wasn't the implication at all. As a matter of fact, it's kind of the opposite. They were trying to make sure that the South, who was treating them like they weren't citizens, didn't benefit from the people that they didn't consider to be citizens in any way, except for to add to their population count. That is a critical piece of information that no leftist will tell you about. And then as far as Martin Luther King Jr., I'm sorry, what was his speech about that they are quoting there? That there would be, I have a dream that we will one day be judged on the content of our character, not the color of our skin, that blacks and whites, Jews and Christians, and everyone will be able to join hands, say free at last. I don't hear a anti-white message in there. I don't hear a message of like reverse racism or any kind of new age horse shit that you're trying to push. Sorry, Martin Luther King Jr. was actually a very unifying figure, which is why he is referenced by people on both sides. And as a matter of fact, guess what? You know which side opposed him the most? That's right, it would be Democrats. And as a matter of fact, all the way up through the years up until the point of the Great Societies Act by Lyndon Baines Johnson, who only became president because, I think he was elected. He was elected for a term after that, but he effectively became president because JFK was shot. And when he passed the Great Societies Act, it was meant to sort of be quote unquote fix for Black America, which unfortunately all it did was make them reliant on government, which a lot of people believe, and there's a great case to make to state that that was a system put in place to make Black people reliant on government and ensure that they would never be able to escape poverty because they'd be reliant on government for everything. I don't see how that makes the Democrat Party this benevolent party for the little man and for the minority. I see that as being a group that has at every turn attempted to exploit the minorities for everything they can get out of them, including, once again, including electoral votes, including census numbers, including whatever they can find. However, this lady is deciding that no, none of that's relevant. None of the intent was relevant. None of the actual, meaning behind any of this is relevant. The only part that's relevant is my interpretation of it in today's society, and my current perception that racism is still running rampant, which, by the way, it's not. And the idea that you would be angry at someone for of any race, especially white, for invoking Dr. Martin Luther King is just like how I've heard this weird idea that if you're white and you want to cosplay as a Black character from something in fiction, no, you can't do that. That's cultural appropriation, or that's I'm sorry. I thought that when you showed that you liked the character so much you would dress up as that character, that was a form of flattery, because it's imitation. It's attempting to, look as much like that person that you probably admire enough to actually go through the time and effort to cosplay as this character, or to present yourself as this character in some sort of setting where you're representing a historical figure or a character that you like or a storyline that you like or something like that. Why is it that when white people attempt to use the uniting messages of Black Americans or Hispanic Americans and attempt to use it in a way that suggests that I believe in the equality that was suggested and seemingly was the ultimate goal of great American leaders and historical figures like Dr. Martin Luther King? Why is that why is that a bad thing? Why is that a thing that you now are always trying to chastise? And for God's sake, I don't know what you've done to the children of Martin Luther King. I don't know how bad you've indoctrinated them. I don't know much about the children of Dr. Martin Luther King, but if you're telling me that his kids don't want their father's most influential works and speeches to be repeated today by people of a different race, that is such the antithesis of his message that the only one who's disrespecting Dr. Martin Luther King is you. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be going so hard in this discussion about racial issues, but it really pisses me off that we can point to events in our own history and point to them over and over again, like the fact that the most bloody war in our history was the Civil War. That means that the fight for mainly the freedom of Black slaves was so important that we fought our most bloody war, brother against brother, to make sure that practice ended. And to be fair, that practice actually started in England and with Britain, who did everything from paying huge sums of money to using their fleet in the oceans to hunt down slave ships that were still operating to shut down the transatlantic slave trade once and for all. They were the first country to really start doing that. We followed suit shortly thereafter. But if you're talking about worldwide groups that have done the most to try and end the practice of slavery and end discrimination wherever we find it, the gold star goes to England, and we get the silver medal because we were right behind them. And my point is just that nobody ever mentions the Arab slave trade or the slave trade that ran up from Africa through the Sahara Desert, by the way, which not only was far more perilous due to the journey, but I won't get into any details here. It was far, far, far more brutal on the actual black people that made that journey than it was for, and not to say that it was a cakewalk to take the transatlantic slave trade across the ocean. It most certainly wasn't. It was a terrible thing. But if you're going to pass blame and point fingers and hold grudges and continue to push narratives that are false, to continue to condemn modern white people for false accusations about history that you know nothing about in the name of, quote unquote, in the name of black people, when all you're doing is really just showing you are an embarrassment not to your race but to yourself, then there's not much that I can see that seems like it's in any way doing this for the betterment of your communities or your I don't know, I don't even want to say your race, your group, whatever it is. The way that things have to always be split up into groups in itself today is bad enough. And you notice it's always coming from one group of people on one side. It's not even all Democrats. It's usually just one select group of people, the identity-obsessed left, that has to see the most defining feature of somebody to be their race or their sex or whatever else it is, and has to cry racism. And we can't, because, ever since this widespread idea became commonplace in a suggestion that this is the definition of racism, actually, it's power and privilege. No, that's not what racism is. Racism is when you believe that your race is superior to another, or in any way just inherently has some sort of overall greater value than another race, based on immutable characteristics, things you can't change, things that you're born as, and things that you can't change from in your entire life. To hold anybody in contempt just for that alone, I'm sorry, and that's exactly what these people are doing, and it is despicable. And it's, no matter how much you scream about slavery, even if you were right about any of it, yes, slavery was a terrible thing. The answer for it is not to constantly beat everyone over the head with it in modern days because somehow you feel... I mean, this is what I really don't understand, too. What way does slavery affect you today? There's always this discussion about generational wealth, and there was no opportunity. Guess what? Big shocker here, probably, to anybody that is preaching this stupid message. The idea of generational wealth is so much less likely than the idea of entrepreneurial wealth or self-made wealth, because, and there's a very simple reason why, when you actually have to earn money, you're much more responsible with money. When you inherit money, if you aren't taught and have firsthand experience in how to manage it and how to properly put it away or invest it or do something with it that's productive, or just flat out have the sense and the will to save it, then you're far more likely to blow that generational wealth in just your generation. It's not even going to make it another generation in that family line, because when you are, say, like a silver spooner kid who grew up getting everything you wanted from your parents and they were very successful, and when they die, they pass on all their money to you. Typically speaking, those people don't retain their wealth. The people that actually start becoming billionaires and accumulating vast wealth are people who, like I said, are able to present ideas in our modern society that are beneficial and make people want to buy them. And so entrepreneurial-minded people, creative-minded people, talented people, and people who are good at adapting to the time that we're in are the people who will be successful. People who complain incessantly about those things and are always shouting reparations are typically people who are not going to ever get out of this situation, because once again, they're just asking for you to handle their shit again. And most of them have not done anything in their lives to really warrant that kind of mentality. It's too embedded, and it's run so deep. And the problem is that when you hear people like this, it gets you fired up. It gets you all, I mean, just listen to the way just ridiculous leftists on social media talk about race. They talk about it with the same level of ignorance, the same level of dismissal of any kind of other grievance, and speak about black people as a monolith, speak about every race as a monolith, are more tribalistic than anything that has come before in this country in terms of, well, the bare minimum in the modern era. And it's just simply an absolute ridiculous concept from the get-go. So that was a lengthy response, I know. But we'll just we'll play this next segment. This is a good segment to end on. Hear Clay Higgins' response, and then we'll probably call it a day. Because, like I said, I knew that was going to piss me off. But I just real quick, I really did want to touch on those things, because I've been hearing a lot of these things lately, and I didn't even know a lot about it. I knew that that the suggestions that I've been hearing lately, now that film Am I Racist has come out by Matt Walsh, and we've seen some of the more obvious race hustling, DEI pushing sorts of counselors in action. It's clear that these people not only have no idea what they're talking about, they may have never, like Robin DiAngelo, I don't think she's ever spent any time whatsoever, any significant amount of time whatsoever, with a black person. Just spent time talking to a black person. Just had a conversation with them as a peer and not as a white person talking to a black person, where you have to adhere to these specific rules. Because of the way she writes about, for example, one of the more infamous ones is, if you're a white woman and you hear the plight of black Americans and you feel the need to cry, please excuse yourself from the room, because white women crying has caused the murder of so many black men in this country, falsely accused of rape. Really, get the fuck out of here. Come on. We're really going there. That's where we're going. We're making it so that if you feel legitimately sad for this person, because you're being told all this horrible stuff that's happened to him, you're no longer even allowed to express the overwhelming emotion you feel based on your empathy because you're overcome with it, because you've been told to be overcome with it. And so it's just I'm always just blown away by the new tricks they employ to try and make it so that it seems like there's a never-ending stream of what do you call it? It's just a never-ending scheme of constantly finding new ways in which they can suggest that black people are owed this, black people are owed that, black people, and of course these people like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, they make tens of thousands of dollars for one speech. Yet, I never heard of Robin DiAngelo or Ibram X. Kendi going into impoverished black neighborhoods and using that money to fund an effort to clean up the streets, to hire more police officers, to make sure that there's less crime on the streets, to make sure that, because they don't want that, because they think the cops are racist, and they think that it's lunacy any way you slice it. And unfortunately, there's very little that anyone can do unless you're already So, sorry, let's go. I was trying to think of let me go back to the clip. That's right. I was like, what was I going to do? Oh, yeah, that's right. So let's play this clip. And
Thank my colleague, and I appreciate my Democrat colleague for exemplifying exactly the kind of oppression of freedoms that we're referencing. How about we'll quote whoever we want to quote? How about that's my First Amendment right? That's exactly the kind of baked-in oppression. Like, how dare a white Republican quote Martin Luther King? We actually had a congressman say that just now in this committee. Well, thank you, good lady, for once again exemplifying the type of oppression that we stand against. You know I'm right. You know I'm right.
Order. Mr. Higgins has the floor.
And we will quote who we please to quote.
A disgrace.
And we will continue to speak freely because I'm a veteran. That's the country that I serve. That's the Constitution I swore an allegiance to. And that oath has no expiration date. I will fight for it with my last life's blood. For my right to speak freely and yours, good lady. You will never hear me saying, how dare you quote anybody you please to quote. And that exemplifies, America, precisely the type of institutional oppression that my colleague, Mr. Cloud's bill, for which I'm an original co-sponsor, hopes to push back against.
Of you know that I practice law, but
so that's I can't listen to this bitch. She's just as annoying. But you notice that right there. That's the difference. And one thing that's interesting is he mentioned being a veteran. That's one place where I could say that when you hear veterans speak, race doesn't exist on the battlefield either. When you're an American soldier, and you're in a firefight, and you got no one to rely on but the people that you are there with from your country to defend your country's values and its place in the world, and the only people you have to rely on are your fellow Americans. Race doesn't exist anymore. Our petty differences don't exist anymore. When it's a matter of life and death, that's far more important. So I guarantee you, someone like Clay Higgins, who served in combat and and also, as we saw from the opening clip, preempted the idea that his gang task force was in any way discriminatory, as the black leaders from, I think he said churches at the time, were there supporting the officers that were going after this gang, because they not only understood they're going after them not because they're black, because they're violent, but in all likelihood, these black gang members are likely targeting the very areas where these churches are, where there are black communities. Who do you think they are? Who do you think they're terrorizing and robbing from and potentially killing and murdering? It's the people that they live amongst. It's other black Americans. And it's never okay for anyone to say that on the right, and it's never okay for white people to talk about it. But unfortunately, once again, when did we cede territory of who gets the right to exercise their First Amendment enshrined rights and decided that, this group can, this group can't? I don't ever remember hearing that vote come up. And I think that, until this country gets... that's why it's so refreshing that we see a Republican leader like Donald Trump, who was starting to really, and has continued to really bring together voters from all different demographics in all different areas of the country, different professions, different financial statuses, different income levels, different zip codes, whatever it might be. People from all different walks of life, because we've reached a point where the divide and conquer strategy is too obvious. It's too blatant. It's too harmful. And the promises that were made falsely by Joe Biden when he took office in 2021, and he said that he was going to work to heal the deep division and wounds that had been plaguing this country as of recent years, and he did the exact opposite, which is interesting, because you would have imagined that, by thinking about Joe Biden, people have always had this kind of impression of Joe Biden in their head that comes to mind immediately of oh yeah, Joe Biden, yeah, he's a good old guy. No, actually, he's not. He's not really a good old guy. He's got some serious problems, and unfortunately, until more people are willing to yeah, it's just it's amazing, and I hope that you hear from senators and people in the House, and you hear from Rick, Tim Scott, you hear from Byron Donalds, you hear from like so many people in positions where they made their money in the private sector. They were successful in business or in finance, in something, and they come and they're appreciative of everything that they've gained from the country. And then you come across people who have nothing but endless grievance about the country for doing this and doing that, and are not willing to at one point accept one tiny bit of responsibility for themselves maybe having a part in them ending up in the situation that they're in. And that's not, unfortunately, though, the overall point. The overall point is that over the last couple of years, unfortunately, this type of attitude has almost been encouraged by an executive branch that has sort of just treated the country as is. And it's so sad to see. As I mentioned the statistics before, like around the time when we were approaching the end of George Bush's presidential term, we were about to move into, I think it was like a year or 2 years before that, before the end of Mewtwo's. Hold on a second. Once again, what did I say? Mewtwo. I did this yesterday. I mentioned some weird Pokemon thing. We're nearing the end of George W. Bush's presidency, where no one guessed at all that Barack Obama was going to be the candidate. As a matter of fact, I remember at the time I even listened to some conservative radio. I wasn't even a conservative at the time, but when I was working, I listened to the radio. I just happened to turn on talk radio sometimes, and I remember at the time I was occasionally listening to Hannity. I hated Hannity at the time, but I still listened to him. And I remember on his show, it was always talking about stop Hillary, stop Hillary, stop Hillary. And no one was really talking about Obama at the moment, really at that time. But it was during this time period when the survey that I've referenced before came out about racial relations among younger Americans and how they were heading in a direction to look better than they've ever been in the country since the signing of not signing. Well, I guess I'll have to find the place. Anyway, but yeah, that was a time where people didn't feel like race played a major part in their daily lives, and they most certainly didn't feel that their race made them more or less vulnerable to violence or discrimination or anything like that. We were moving so strongly in a direction where you can never eliminate it entirely, but you can make it so insignificant you don't really have to think about it much. And that was where we were seriously steering ourselves. And unfortunately, here we are once again with anyway, that's what's going on, and I really, I have a feeling that this kind of thing is going to, is hopefully going to pass, because we can't have, we've already had so many government agencies falling. Like, look at the military, and people have referenced this before. Look at the military recruitment numbers. Look what DEI has done to the military. Look what it's done to much of the private sector. Look what it's done to just about every government agency. I mean, it has corrupted them beyond all belief, and in a way that is so incredibly dangerous that there's really very little that, unfortunately, anyone can do to as individuals, that they can do to bring that back, except for in your daily life to stick to the principle. I don't care how much it pisses off the left to hear someone say, I don't see color. Because the truth is, I don't see color. I recognize people for their unique qualities, and I appreciate anything that makes them stand out. I don't think that defines them as a person, though. And I don't think anybody should be defined by that. I think that their character is really the most defining feature of them, and that can only be discovered by spending enough time talking to them, getting to know them, understanding them, and finding out what's really in their heart. And people need to be willing to do that again, because whether you're doing it in the name of standing up for someone or you're doing it in the name of tearing someone down, no one asked you to do that. No one needed you to do that. You did that to make yourself look good, and that's probably the most disgusting thing about the whole thing. That bitch right there just did everything she could to make herself seem like she was this noble defender of civil rights, when all she did was just go on a tirade that was so anti-America in general that I go back to my original point. I don't know who she serves, like what district it is in her state, but man, I pray so hard that not only do we get to a point where we are able to get back to where we were, but we are finally able to more or less accept the ideas that focusing on diversity to the point that we demand discrimination based on meeting racial quotas, or putting people into positions that they're not qualified to be in and are only doomed to fail in, is not compassionate to that person. None of these things are good ideas, and they lead to unhealthy societies and in some cases very dangerous situations that should and could be completely So, sorry about that, guys. That was it was intense, and I know it was a rough one, but that's what's been going on. And man, it's had some harsh words on this one, but know that I as I said before, I don't pull any punches, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, of course. I'm not trying to do that, but I do have a very low threshold for ignorance, and especially willful ignorance, because, when you look at a lot of these people in Congress, you got to remember these are people that the vast majority of them came up in wealthy communities with wealthy family and wealthy neighborhoods. And as much as they would like to champion themselves as defenders of the poor, downtrodden minorities, they share nothing in common with those poor, downtrodden minorities, no matter how hard they try to say they do. And so, unfortunately, God, jeez, day after day now, every time I'm doing a stream, sorry. So unfortunately, that's still something that she's selling, and some people are buying into it, but we got to keep reminding people that that this is how division gets started in the first place. This is how when you amplify everyone's differences rather than try to de-emphasize them. That's when you exponentially start to maximize the differences between people, and that is when you can expect things to boil over to levels that make things get pretty ugly. And so we really need to start at the bare minimum. If our leaders are not going to do that, then we as the people should do that, and we can set the example for them. Maybe that's a better idea. So, but before I go off on any more tangents, I guess I'll call it a day. I didn't expect to get that worked up on this one, but man, that one really was a tough one. But my goodness, I know this is my first show on time in a while, but thank you guys so much for watching. I did check the numbers for the last couple streams, and by golly, you guys have come out once again, and even when I wasn't on time, you guys have turned out to watch my shows. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. as I've said before, I can't believe the consistent viewer base I've had, and bear in mind one thing real quick before I go, because I think it's kind of important to mention this. Right now, because of the struggles that have been going on with getting everything in order, and still, some hiccups that have been coming up along the way, I'm trying to just solidify the whole process to where it's something I'm comfortable in and I'm accustomed to, and there's not any more like real questions of how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that, and blah, blah, blah. So I'm purposely not really going out on a limb to sort of blitz social media as much as I could, and that is on purpose, because while I'm very happy with the turnout of the people that have been coming out to see me, and I am promoting just enough to hopefully get a few people interested in the show, and kind of steadily grow in small increments, but still in increments start growing. I'm kind of doing this as a slow but steady approach of trying to improve until I get to the level where I was picturing I would be at when I was able to perform in the way that, and just in general, like, have the right ideas for the show that I've wanted to have since the very beginning. So since so since I gotta wait to do that anyway, I figured now would be a good time for me to just kind of refine everything, refine the process, get used to it, get the format set up, and make sure everything is kind of flowing the way I want it to. But that's not to say that I'm not still trying to get a few people to check out the show, give me some response and feedback, and let me know how they think I'm doing, and hopefully start to be able to improve the show off of the feedback I do get from everybody that has has any kind of suggestions or recommendations for me or whatever. So if you do have anything like that, please feel free to let me know. As I've said before, I have no issue. I have thick skin. I can take it. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. And it's better for me to hear from people who do watch my show what things I should work on and what things they would like to see and what things are maybe not working and whatever it might be. But yeah, let me know. Drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you guys. But in the meantime, once again, I can't thank you guys enough for the continuing support, and it lets me at least know that okay, I'm on the right track. I'm right. In fact, I'm even more better position than I thought I would be. So, and I have you guys to thank for that entirely, because of consistently showing up to check out the videos. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And if you aren't following me on X yet, I've mentioned the last couple of shows, follow me on X. Whenever there's going to be a stream that's going to be late or something, I will probably be posting that at least a little bit in advance before I go online, so that you guys can know if, because like I said, I almost skipped the first and second one actually, until somebody beat my ass to get those in there. But anyway, sorry, talking to somebody else. Anyway, thank you guys though. I really appreciate it. Really, really appreciate it. And I've enjoyed it a lot. I've been having a lot of fun with it too. So so I hope you guys are enjoying it as well. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next one. So until then, take care of yourselves. Have a fantastic afternoon or evening. And I will see you then. Peace.
Now, I can't read it. There's no words on it. Okay. There's no words there. To play us out. What does that mean? To play us out. What is for credit?